And this preacher was speaking in a live session. I don't know exactly how you do that, but he was speaking in a live session. And there was a comment side over here to the side, and people were commenting on what he was talking about. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to kind of look at those comments and see what they're saying. And what I noticed was that about 7 out of 10 comments, and this guy was a pretty good, I mean, he was a lot better than me. He's a good preacher. But 7 out of the 10 comments were very negative. Very negative. Some of them with extremely foul language. People just on there just trying to cause trouble, which is the way Satan works, so we shouldn't be surprised, right? But it is absolutely amazing to me that just in a few years, the last few years, I've really been watching this, but it's amazing to me just how far people have turned to pure evil. Has anybody else noticed that, or is it just me?
No, I guess.
Okay. I mean, everybody is noticing this. It's just pure evil. It's not always been this bad. I mean, if you think back 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and, you know, some of you like me, it's getting a little bit age here, it wasn't like that back then. But something has changed. Something has changed. And that's what we're going to be talking about. One of my favorite verses in the Bible, and you guys have heard me say this before, and especially on Wednesday nights, and that's Ecclesiastes 3:15. And it says, what is happening now has happened before, and what will happen in the future has happened before, because God makes the same things happen over and over again. So I thought that kind of set the stage for where we're going with this message. This verse says that what we're seeing today has happened before. So when could this scenario that we're seeing with the people, the way we've just talked about, the people, when could we have seen a scenario, or when would that have been or took place in the past? When could it have ever happened before? Well, the Bible tells us when this mindset happened before. Jesus went up to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples came to him in secret and asked him when all these things that he had been talking about would take place, and when he would return to earth to get them. Jesus gave them an illustration of what time would look like as we look in that text again together in Matthew. It says, when the Son of Man returns, it'll be like it was in Noah's day. In Noah's day. When you read back before Noah, we find out that it had gotten to be a pretty wicked place. And also, not only a wicked place, there were some other things that were going on that we've been talking about in our Wednesday night service, of how that the fallen angels had married the daughters of men, and there was all kinds of not very good people running around, part people, part angels, but that was part of that. But it says that the people were enjoying banquets and parties and weddings right up until the time that Noah entered into his boat. People didn't realize what was going to happen to them, and until the flood came and swept them all away. That's the way it'll be when the Son of Man comes. God had instructed Noah to build an ark to save the people that would follow him, because he was going to destroy the world with wrath. Remember one thing, and I've said this several times, before God sends wrath, he always sends a way out. He always provides a way out for his people. Always does. I believe every person was offered a chance to get on that boat, and I believe they turned it down. Obviously, they turned it down. Can you imagine how that they laughed and scoffed at Noah? If you do a comparison between that and as if we were to go down there to Walmart. Honestly, folks, if we all got together and went to Walmart and we started having church service in Walmart parking lot, we would get the same kind of laughs and scoffs as what we're talking about here with Noah at this point in time, because we've got to that low point that we're looking at. But they laughed and scoffed at Noah when he was telling them that there was a flood coming. There had never been a flood before, since the creation of Adam anyway. Noah was building a boat that was most likely the largest boat in history. Don't know that for sure, but if you've ever seen the ark up in that they've done the reproduction, that's a great big boat. So I don't know if anybody who's ever built one that big before at that point in time. I'd say they probably hadn't. And he was building it in the middle of a field. So they were very busy making fun of Noah and living for themselves in that day, too busy to pay attention to what Noah was saying, that God's wrath was coming. Another place we find this type scenario is when God sent wrath to Sodom and Gomorrah. We all know the story. We've heard it. I've talked about it before. Because of its wickedness. He offered all the people a chance to escape through the voice of Lot, just like he had the voice of Noah. But they laughed at him, and they didn't want no part of that. They wanted to continue their parties and orgies and homosexual activities. That's what they wanted to do. When Lot and his wife and 2 daughters left the city before God's wrath fell, God had told them not to look back. But we know the story. Lot's wife did look back to the place she apparently loved more than she loved God. And she turned to a pillar of salt. She put her desires before her salvation, and it cost her everything. So the question is, for the church and for the people that's watching on the internet, here's the question. Do you put your desires before your salvation? If so, that is a very, very expensive mistake that and you're literally playing with fire. Don't do it. What's the difference in those 2 events that we've just been talking about and what is going on right now? Nothing. There is no difference. Our people now have gotten to the point they were in Sodom and Gomorrah and also before Noah's flood. I believe that we have now arrived at the end of days before the rapture. I've been preaching it forever, but right now I think we're right there. So please listen carefully to the biblical proofs that I'm about to show you, and please check what I'm saying. I always want you to check me out, okay? If I'm wrong, I want you to tell me about it, because I'm human and I make a lot of mistakes. 2 Timothy tells you to do that. 2 Timothy 2:15 says, "Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman needeth not be ashamed in doing that, rightfully dividing the word of truth." So check me out. Make sure I'm telling you what's right. So what was it actually like in Noah's day and in those last days of Sodom and Gomorrah? How can we find out kind of what that was? Well, Romans, when Paul wrote a letter to the Romans, in verse 18, he gives us the exact happenings of spiritual and moral decline that causes God to act with anger. All right? In verse 18 it says, "But God shows his anger from heaven." There we go. God shows his anger from heaven against all sinful, wicked people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. They know the truth about God because he has made it obvious to him. The Bible is saying here that wicked people of that day and today have a brain. They know that they are living wrong. They know that they are living for themselves without considering the consequences. Verse 20. "For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and the sky through everything God made. They can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature. So they have no excuse for not knowing God." They don't have no excuse. When they stand before God, when they stand before God to give an account for their life at the great white throne of judgment, people's going to be making all kinds of excuses, trying to get God to let him, escape hell, let him come into his heaven. But they're not going to have any excuses. God's got it covered. We're going to read more about that. God's got it covered where you won't have no excuses. You're offered the chance while you're here and not there. When you get there, it's done too late. So let's read on a little bit further. "The people around us have no excuse for knowing there is a God. The atheist has no excuse. Atheists claim they don't believe there is a God. I've got news for them. I don't believe there's a true atheist out there. I really don't. I think it's just an excuse to make them feel better about the way that they're living, and so that they can stand before God and say, I didn't know any better. Guess what? Not going to work with God. God knows your thoughts. God knows your thoughts. God has made himself manifest in ways that proves he exists. You can't deny it. Can't deny it. No one has a legitimate excuse for their actions. They just need to open their eyes and submit to God. For hundreds of years, true scientists, there's a lot of non-true scientists, but for hundreds of years, and I can tell you how I know these are true, because of what they come up with here. All right? They have tried to prove and explain how the universe was formed. In each case, they all seem, the true scientists, all seem to wind up at the same conclusion. Our universe had to have a creator, God. That's what true scientists say. Okay? The ones that try to cover it up and want to live their own way, they don't hardly agree with that. Verse 21 said, yes, they knew God, but they wouldn't worship him as God or even give him thanks. And they began to think up foolish ways or foolish ideas that what God was like. As a result, their minds became dark and confused. We got a little darkness and confusion going on in our world today. Claiming to be wise, instead they became utter fools. Instead of worshiping the glorious, ever-living God, they worshiped idols made to look like mere people and birds and animals and reptiles. If you were to stop and think about what people worship today, what would you come up with? What would you come up with? First of all, what is an idol? Idolatry is something or someone other than God. In other words, something other that you put higher than God, something that you think more of than God. It may be your job, it may be your car, it may be something that you've acquired. But whatever you put in front of God, that becomes your idol. The thing about God or us is when God created us, he created us with a part of us that has to worship something. Okay? We're designed to worship God. Okay? We have to worship something. And we will. Lost or saved, we're going to worship something. We're either going to be saved and worship God, or we're going to worship what we've acquired or our jobs. Whatever we put in front of God, that is what we worship. What we worship. The question is for the church and the people that's our extra church out there is, do you have anything that you put before God? Now, it's easy for us Christians to look at idols, and it's easy for us to look at things like a statue of Buddha or Krishna, or even a statue of Mary with child, and look at that as idol worship. And that is idol worship. You can't call it anything else. But what about the people that have made global warming their religion? That is the fastest growing religion, I believe, on planet Earth. Global warming. They were talking about the war in Ukraine the other day and talking about doing different things that they needed to do, you know, cut off Putin here and put sanctions and do all this. And then one of the goofy globalists or global warmists spoke up and said, oh, but whatever you do, we've got to take care of our planet now. Really? I guess all those bombs going off over there and the dust flying in there, I guess that's all right, just as long as we, you know, don't burn too much gasoline. It's all a joke. It's all a hoax. It is another way that Satan has got people sucked into believing something. Now, I'm not the kind of person that wants to go throwing garbage down on the ground. It makes me mad when I go down the road and people throw the garbage out, especially when they throw it in my yard because they love to do that for some reason. I'm not that kind of person, okay? I think we do need to respect what God has given us. But to absolutely go crazy to the point we're starving people to death, people that don't have no money that now can't go to work because gas is $4 a gallon almost, and will be $7 right at once. It's going to happen. 2 weeks, probably $7. That's what they're saying. I hope it don't, but it probably will. Global warming, the people, is going to save the planet. Like God needs help saving His planet. That's the problem. People don't realize it's His planet. It's not ours anyway. He will take care of that. And if people understood, if these people in this brand new religion, and I'm serious, it's a brand new religion, if people understood this, they probably wouldn't worry too much knowing that what God is going to do when His wrath comes in the 7 years of tribulation and the volcanoes is going to be exploding. Anybody ever heard about the ring of fire? Anybody knows what that is? The volcanoes in the ring of fire? It goes up the west coast from South America all the way up through Mexico, up California, across Canada, right under Alaska there. It goes right down over into Russia, right down into China, and all the way down and then the Hawaiian Islands. It's all volcanic. When we get into Revelation in some of these places, we get to talking about some of the wraths that's coming. We'll get into that a little bit deeper. But when they blow, they really blow. And so this global warming stuff ain't going to amount to a hill of beans at that point in time. Okay? The only global warming they need to be worried about is the warming that their butts is going to feel when they go into hell because they're in the wrong place. Okay? All right. I've been around people in society and lately, and this just irritates me. As you can tell, it really irritates me. Sorry for that, but it does. Our people, there are people out there that think more of their dog than they do human life. Have you been around any of those people? They really do. If you look at their dog wrong, they are all over you. Okay? And I'm saying that to say this. I have noticed that some of these people, because I delivered for FedEx for about 1.5 years over in Campbellsville. I was aiming to do it just one winter or during Christmas one year. And I decided that they wanted me to stay on. And it was kind of fun. I was getting a little exercise, lost a little weight, felt a little better. I thought that was pretty cool. So I was doing that. And I learned one thing. The people would rather for a dog to eat you up than you to smack back at the dog, because you better not smack back at that dog. But I've noticed that these same people are the same people that fight for the right to kill unborn babies plumb up to the day of birth. Plumb up to the day of birth. Can you believe that? And now we see these nuts, and I did say nuts, running our very broken government, that are wanting to let the mother decide up to 8 hours after the baby's born now, laying on the table with her, give her 8 hours to decide if she wants to keep it or kill it. That's what these nuts are discussing right now, up to 8 hours. If I go out and pull my gun out and I shoot somebody, they're going to get me for murder, right? What is the difference? There is none. There's no difference in that. That's murder. Any way you want to look at it. And it doesn't have to come out in order for it to be murder. I mean, it is ridiculous. What is going on in our world today? Again, verses 24 and 28 explains it very well. God abandoned them. In the King James Version, it says God gave them over to a reprobate mind. So let's read that a little bit more. In verse 24, it says God abandoned them to do whatever shameful things their hearts desired. As a result, they did vile and degrading things to each other's bodies. They traded the truth of God for a lie. So they worshiped and served the things God had created. Here we go. There's your earth. Instead of the Creator Himself, who is worthy of eternal praise. Amen. That is why God abandoned them to their shameful desires. Here we go. Even the women turned against their natural way to have sex and instead indulged in sex with each other. And the men, instead of having normal sexual relations with women, burned in lust for each other. Men did shameful things with other men, and as a result of this sin, they suffered within themselves, since they thought it foolish to acknowledge God. He abandoned them to do their foolish thinking and let them do things that should never be done. Now, I know in the world that we live in today that homosexuality is a hush-hush subject in the church. You better not mention that. You may hurt somebody's feelings. I mean, I've got this wrote down. They may quit putting money in the offering plate. And that is why it is wrong for that is what's wrong with a lot of churches today. They have got soft and they just try to please everyone. God does not take this stuff lightly. He don't take it lightly. I was watching I was watching a video that David Wilkerson, he's a good preacher, he put out. And he's showing interviews of some of the huge mega churches and stuff. And he had these, like Oprah and a few of these other big talk people. They had these preachers in and was asking them questions. And they were asking them questions about, you know, will gay people make it to heaven? Is gay people, you know, in your church? Is it all right for them to be preaching and all this kind of things? And to my surprise, most of those teachers or preachers or whatever you want to call them, oh yeah, it's fine. You know, it's fine to do this and it's fine. And after I watched that, I mean, it kind of played a part in this message. It really made me sick. It really did. It made me question those churches. It really did. In the book of Leviticus, in chapter 18 and verse 6, this is the one that those kind of people don't want to hear. It says, plain and simple, you shall not lie with a male as one lies with a female. He's talking to a male here. It is an abomination. Leviticus 20:13 says, a man who sleeps with another man is an abomination and should be executed. A lot of people will say, well, that's Old Testament, that's not the New Testament, that don't work today. Let me tell you something. Here's where they mess up. We've talked about the Old Testament and the New Testament a lot. The old deal that God made with mankind versus the new deal God made with mankind. In the old deal, it was all about what you had to do to have salvation, right? Okay? It was all about that you put your sacrifices on the altar. Here's 10 commandments. Don't break them. This is the deal. That's the deal God made. The new deal is you accept Jesus Christ. His blood pays for your sins, so you don't have to put the sacrifices on there. When God wrote this back then, that didn't change because of the way that you get saved. That old deal. So God's principle didn't change. God's principles don't ever change. Because, see, the thing about it is, in our lives, we base everything that we do on time. Okay? Things are different in different times and stuff like that. God don't change. What He said back then, He means today. So He's meaning the same thing right here when He says it is an abomination. Now, I'm not saying go out and start killing them. I'm telling you, we need to start praying for them and start working with them. All right? But how sick is our culture to think that God has changed His mind? And it's now okay for same-sex relationships, or it's okay for people living like that to be, give me that next slide. There we go. That it's okay now that they be preachers and teachers of God's Word. And they're doing that. That is an abomination. That's all you can make out of it. God's not changed His mind. They were not, listen, these people were not born this way. How many times have you heard that, oh, we're born gay? They're not born that way. And I'll tell you how I know that. Okay? They may be possibly born with a weakness that was not dealt right or dealt in the wrong way. I believe that every person that is born has some kind of weakness, okay? Every one of you's got at least one weakness, I promise you. There's something that, with me, I like to eat too much, okay? But that's not the only weakness I've got. I got a whole list of them because I stacked them up. But here's the thing, okay? Some men may have a weakness that they have to have a lot of women. Some women may have the same thing. They want a lot of men. You may have a weakness with alcohol or drugs or any of those things, okay? So what's to say that a child may not think, hey, especially in the world where it's promoted, I may want to have the same sex relationship. The problem is that it's not being dealt with. And now it's been promoted because that's what Satan does, right? It's been promoted. So there is a problem and we have to deal with it. But if it's not been dealt with, it's just accepted. Instead of getting that child help and teaching that child that same-sex relationships are wrong, people seem to take the easy way out and they say, well, you may be gay. That's what they do. You may be gay. Something went wrong somewhere in that child's life that deceived them. or they were around the wrong people. We as Christians must pray that they find God, find help before it's too late. So what causes a society to accept that kind of lifestyle when the Bible is full of it? Believe me, it really is. It's called sin. S-I-N. Big letters, sin. The more sin you and I allow into our lives, the more our lives sin requires. Sin is like a fungus. It grows out of control. And it causes you to get further away from God to the point where God gives you over to it. He lets you go to do whatever you want to do. That is a very, very risky point to get in. When you get to that point, it's called reprobate. And there is no hope for you. It is not that God wouldn't or couldn't save you or forgive you. It's just the simple fact that you have so much sin stacked between you and God that you can't hear Him no longer and He can't hear you. I want to give you an illustration. This really happened. About 5 years ago, I guess I'll never forget this. About 5 years ago, we was down in Greensburg and we was having revival down there. And I wasn't preaching, but I was helping with the altar calls and that kind of thing. And this revival had went on for 14 days. There was 56 people got saved during those 14 days. And I think we were on the last night. I'm not 100% sure. But I was over on one side of the altar and I was praying with people. And every time I would look up, when I got done praying for a person, I'd look up to see if somebody, because they just kept coming. I've never seen nothing like it. There was more people on the altar than there was in the seats. It was a great time. And I noticed that there was a woman over here. There was 2 or 3 women over there praying with her. And every time I would get done praying with somebody, I'd look over there and they're still praying with her. Well, just shortly, one of them motioned for me to come over. And I went over there and I knelt down beside her. And I asked her, because the lady told me, said, we don't know what else to say, what else to do. And said, can you pray for her or pray with her? And I said, sure. So I kneeled down beside this lady, and she was about my age, maybe a little bit older. And I asked her, I said, what's going on? And she said, I can't hear God anymore. I can't feel God anymore. And I said, that implies that at one time you did. And she said, yeah. And I said, well, so were you born again? She said, yes. She said, I was born again. And I said, where did you go to church at? And she said, right here. And I said, where do you live at? And she said, right down there under the hill. And I said, so you have not been going to church. So I'm trying to figure out what's going on with this lady, okay? Because if you're born again, you got a connection with God, right? You do, okay? So I'm trying to figure out what is going on with this lady. So after talking to her for quite some time, I knew that there was some sin in play there somewhere. And I would ask her, is there something that hasn't been dealt with in your life? No, everything's fine. I said, really? So, I'm about to spaz out at this point. I'm like, okay, I don't even know what to say. So I start praying. I start praying to God, in my mind. I'm praying to God and I said, God, you're going to have to help me with this. And I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. And He said, not through my ears, but through my mind, He said, do this. He said, that's her. So I told her, I said, you see my hand? She said, yeah. And I said, that's you. And He said, now put a pancake on it. I put a pancake on there and I said, that pancake, that's sin. And I said, all these sins in your life apparently hasn't been dealt with, because that's what God was telling me to do. And I said, now that this pancake they're stacked up this high, I said, that great big cherry on top up there, that's God. And I said, He's trying to talk to you through these pancakes. And He can't get through and you can't hear Him. I said, so we need to deal with those pancakes. I said, there's got to be some sin in your life that is blocking you. She said, I don't know of anything. And I said, is there anybody, the first thing God told me to ask her, He said, is there anybody that you are mad at, you've got a grievance with or anything? And she said, no. She said, but I hate my son-in-law. I said, that's where we're going to start. And we started praying right there. And by the time we got done praying with that one and getting forgiveness, she'd done thought of something else. And then she thought of something else. And as we came down that pancake, it got pretty fast. She got to thinking of him. And we got down here and she said, woo! I can feel him now. And chill, just like they are right now. I got chill bumps on my face. But that is what is happening. That is what is happening. We, as Christians, allow that to happen to us sometimes. But the world has got so much sin that God can't talk to them, can't get through to them anymore. You got to get the pancakes cleared out. But I'll probably never forget that as long as I lived. She come out there and she was squalling and shouting. I thought, whew, that's nice. I like it. It's very good. Their lives became full of every kind of wickedness. Sin, greed, hate, envy, murder, quarreling. He don't leave anything out here. Deception, malice, behavior, and gossip. And they are backstabbers, haters of God, insolent, proud, and boastful. They invent new ways of sinning. And they disobey their parents. They refuse to understand. They break promises. They're heartless. They have no mercy. And they know God's justice requires that those who do these things deserve to die. Yet they do them anyway. And worse yet, they encourage others to do so. And you could literally spend the rest of the day on those 3 verses right there. Most of us at some point in our lives has either done one or more of those things, or at least we know somebody that has. And these things are not to be taken lightly. In the 15 verses in Romans that we have just read and went through, these are the things that God caused God to destroy the earth with water and Sodom and Gomorrah with fire. The evil things that we're talking about, that mindset. I heard someone say once that God would owe the people who died in the flood and in Sodom and Gomorrah, He would owe them an apology if He sends wrath. If He don't send wrath on this earth, He would owe them an apology. I'd have to agree, wouldn't you? Okay? Now, we're going to focus just a second more on homosexuality. I did not intend this message to be that way, because Tanya asked me, she said, was that what you was intending on? I said, no. I said, I was putting it down as it came to me. In Daniel, well, let me back up just a little bit. During the tribulation time, we all know that there's going to be a man that's going to show up. And we know that that man is going to be the Antichrist. We know his number 666. The Bible talks a lot about this man, so we can find out stuff about him. In Daniel chapter 11, verse 37, it says, neither shall he, and this is talking about the Antichrist, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all. God gives us all the pieces to the prophecy puzzle. I talk about puzzles all the time. He gives us all the pieces to that. I believe, because of what it's, not only because of what it says here, that's just one part of the puzzle, nor the desire of women. Now, I know if you read that, it is, some people have a problem with it. They say, well, that's just completely out of context to where it should be. Sometimes God throws stuff in places where that it gets your attention. It doesn't, you know, you have to think about it a little bit. I believe that this is what this means, but if it don't, it doesn't matter. I still believe what I'm getting ready to say. I believe the Antichrist will be gay. Okay? And here's the reason I believe that. One of the reasons, there's another one I'm going to share with you, but one of the reasons I believe that is the Antichrist is totally the 100% opposite of what Jesus is. Yet he wants to claim to be the Messiah. Everything he does or will do as an abomination against God. Why on earth would he have a desire for women if he was wanting to do an abomination against God? Okay? So I believe with all my heart that he will be gay. He will likely rally homosexuals together when this time comes to promote his agenda, because I believe they'll fall right into him, because they typically follow any whim of anybody that's promoting that stuff. They suck right into it. In Revelation 6:2, as we talked about in Bible study Wednesday night, for those of you that were here, it says, I saw and behold a white horse, and he that sat on it had a bow. And a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. In the Bible, you'll only find two types of bows. You have the bow with bows and arrows, and then you'll have God's beautiful rainbow. If you notice, there is no mention of arrows in this passage. The Antichrist, I believe, will in fact be carrying probably a rainbow flag or a symbol as our next slide. That's about what this cat's going to look like probably when he comes in. Homosexuality is an abomination, as mentioned in Leviticus. Taking God's beautiful rainbow and using it to promote a gay and lesbian lifestyle, that is an abomination. You can't change it any other way. That's what it is. Did you know, did you know that Tel Aviv, Israel, Tel Aviv, is quickly becoming the global capital for homosexuality? In June 28th, 2017, an article stated that Tel Aviv, Israel, go ahead and put that other slide up there, William, if you will, that Tel Aviv, Israel, boasts one of the world's largest LGBTQ communities. 25% of its population identifies as being gay. A fourth of their population. That was almost 5 years ago, in 2017. This compares to the other major cities of the world claiming to have 10% participation. What an absolute disgrace in God's holy land. That land, that's God's promised land. And they're invading it with that garbage. But this is what Satan does.